Calvin Castine on the back steps of the former Hotel Champlain, now known as Clinton Community College, just outside of Cliff Haven, New York. And we're here on this 11th day of October for a remembrance of a battle that took place October 11th, 1776, known as the Battle of Valcour, with Benedict Arnold leading the American naval forces. And while we're here, we're also going to be learning a little bit about a new coalition of historical entities, and we'll be enjoying some of that information, but we also want to enjoy the view here, which includes Crab Island, the monument, and that brand new flagpole with the flag flying briskly in the breeze, put up recently by John Wood and Associates, or John Rock and Associates, and a lot of land clearing over there by Roger Harwood, making that all possible. It's nice to see that history of the North Country is enjoying renewed interest, and Hometown Cable is here to help promote that interest on this 11th day of October 2003.
We still have lots of chairs. We've got some very expensive seats here in the front.
This is Fred Smith from the Alice T. Minor Colonial Collection.
Good afternoon. My name is Fred Smith. I'm the director of the Alice T. Minor Museum, and with me this afternoon is John Kruger. Dr. Kruger is the director of the Clinton County Historical Association and Museum. On behalf of all our chart colleagues, lots of them, welcome to our chart kickoff. A very special day. In fact, we even ordered the weather for this day. Now, some of you are wondering, chart, what does that stand for? What is it? Is it a voting group or something? CHART stands for Clinton County Coalition for Heritage, Arts, Recreation, and Tourism. Clinton County Coalition for Heritage, Art, Recreation, and Tourism. It will not be a quiz. And you might ask, what is the mission of CHART? CHART's mission is to coordinate and assist historic, natural, cultural, educational, and recreational resource organizations in order to enhance Clinton County's quality of life and to promote the county as a national and international cultural heritage destination. The time for CHART is right. Over the past few years, increasing numbers of people have availed themselves of the amenities and resources of Clinton County. An organization comprised of organizations, you're going to hear that more than once. CHART is an organization of organizations, is in a perfect position to represent the very interest of those organizations and to promote the resources of Clinton County. Now you ask, who are these members of CHART? Well, there are currently 23 members, and it's a growing organization. In addition to our two museums, we have the Battle of Plattsburgh Association, the Battle of Plattsburgh Committee, Champlain Valley Educational Services, Champlain Valley Transportation Museum, the Clinton County Historical Association and Museum, Clinton Community College, Clinton County Council on the Arts, Clinton County historian, the amazing Addie Shields, Friends of the North Country, Clinton County Planning Department, Hill and Hollow Music, the Kent Lord House, the North Country Cultural Center for the Arts, the North Country Teacher Resource Center, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, the New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation, the Plattsburgh Community Development Office, the Plattsburgh North Country Chamber of Commerce, the town of Chazy historian, the town of Dannemora historian, and W.H. Minor Institute.
That's the part you will be quizzed on.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Greg. CHART is an evolving organization. The fact of the matter is I've only been here since May, and CHART was only one meeting into the formation progress when I started. It's really, in a sense, been jump-started by its affiliation with Lakes to Lots Passage. Lakes to Lots Passage is a state and federally designated scenic byway. It's essentially a locally managed heritage corridor from Waterford, New York, all the way up to Quebec. The Lakes to Lots Passage has been designated by the Federal Highway Administration as an All-American Byway, which is the most prestigious designation under the Scenic Byways program. I believe there are only 21 All-American byways in the United States. And if Carolyn Harding is nodding like an agreement, that must be right. It's a recognition, really, of the historic role of this area in our country's birth. And I mean, we're here on the 227th anniversary of the Battle of Valcour. There's no real better way to underscore that. It's the combination of the history and the scenic beauty. The history took place today, and all you have to do is look out either side and you're overwhelmed with the scenic beauty. We're pleased, as members of CHART, to be the local advisory committee to the Lakes to Lots Passage. And as such, we'll try our best to provide meaningful input in the management of Clinton County's portion of the Lakes to Lots Passage. CHART is very excited about the prospects for recreation, for history, for arts, for tourism, and our role in helping to realize the potential to improve the economic development and the quality and richness of life for those of us here in Clinton County. There are a number of initial actions that have either already been completed, because we're meeting here this afternoon, or they're about to be rolled out. CHART is working on the strategic plan for Celebration Champlain in 2009, the 400th anniversary of Champlain's first arrival here at the lake. We're working on an interpretive audio tape to deal with the Lakes to Lots Passage. We're also pursuing a grant for the development of a master plan for heritage development. I have several people I'd like to introduce to you this afternoon and ask them to come up and speak for a few moments. But before I get to the designated people, I'd like to point out a woman standing in the back by the name of Janet Kennedy, who, without her perseverance, persistence, and banging away on us religiously through email, none of us would be here. So I'd just like to acknowledge Janet for all of that. Now we have with us this afternoon David Fassler. David is a member of the Lakes to Lots Board of Directors, and I'd like David to come up and say a few words. Thank you, David.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to be here and for having such a wonderful day for me to drive up from Schenectady and join you for this event. Just a little bit of background about it. About a year ago, September, I retired from the New York State Department of Transportation, where I had the privilege for the 12 or 13 years prior to my retirement to to develop and implement the New York State Scenic Byways program. And one of the consequences of that effort was the creation of Lake Lost Passage. And I guess because of my background and my hard work, once I was not reporting to the office every day and had all this free time, I was available to serve on the board of directors. I'm happy to do that. I want to take a minute to look at the New York State Scenic Byways program. And you're going to hear me say things that John has already said because they're so essential and vital to what's going on here in Champaign. The Scenic Byways program in New York is completely voluntary. It's locally initiated, and it represents a coalition of communities. It's a community-based grassroots program. It is unregulated at the state level. There are no state mandates, and there is no land use control connected to the Scenic Byways program. The success of New York's Scenic Byways program was based on partnerships, and Lake Lost Passage's success is partnerships within and among the local action committees in Clinton, Essex, Washington, Warren, and Sarasota counties. We're here today to recognize CHART, the Clinton County Coalition for Heritage, Arts, Recreation, and Tourism. Right down our finger, you know. CHART will be, or is now, the local action committee for Clinton County's representation on Lake Lost Passage. And this is exciting because CHART contributes to the beauty of these Scenic Byways partnerships. Their local leadership, local management, and local implementation. The word local is so important to all of us. This has all been so effective here in the Champaign Valley that Lake Lost has been designated as an all-American road. That's the best of the best. The epitome of a scenic byway. Only one of 21 in the whole country. Through active resource management and tourism promotion, scenic byways, and in this case, Lake Lost Passage, improve the quality of life and stimulate economic development throughout the corridor. You know, as an aside, I want to mention I still speak as one of the Department of Transportation. There have been 3 efforts to promote scenic byways statewide in New York since 1997. And in every case, there has been follow-up studies to determine the effectiveness of the promotion. For every dollar we spend in promoting a scenic byway, we've identified that tourists have spent anywhere from $6 to $10 to travel to the North Country or travel around New York State to visit scenic byways. And of course, it's this time of year that makes us so special. We always target our marketing for the fall foliage season, but it's incredible that we realize by giving people a place to go, by giving them a road to ride on, and by identifying destinations such as Clinton County for their trip on scenic byways. Through statewide, national, and international marketing, tourists come to enjoy the region's outstanding historical, natural, and cultural resources. Inspired by the Scenic Byways program, the management of these resources assures that the quality is not degraded over time by increased visitation. The incredible success we have witnessed in Lake Lost Passage, as already acknowledged, can be largely attributed to the genius of our executive director, James. Through the local action committees and now through CHART, Janet has unified the region and created a regional identity, while at the same time allowing the local action committees to maintain their local uniqueness. She assures that each committee represents a special, unique place, while at the same time making it possible for the local action committees to share their regional commonalities with each other and with the travelers and tourists. I'm confident the CHART will be very effective in introducing Clinton County's visitors to the heart and soul of Lake Lost Passage. Thank you.
Thanks very much, David. his responsibilities as a father preempted his love of being here and talking about heritage and culture. He did, however, send some remarks to my colleague Rich Loveland, director of the Battle of Plattsburgh Association, and I'd like to call on Rich to speak for Chris.
Thanks, Lisa. Just a few words from Chris. It's been a huge support to, I think, all of the organizations that were on the initial list. He's been the driving force behind a lot of the local tourism efforts in this area for many years, as we all know and we all appreciate. And he is apologetic about not being here today, but this is his son's first parent weekend, and he has a previous commitment to that. And I would be in the same position first. But here's the words that Chris sent through me to you. Your efforts to include me in the chart kickoff were most kind, having worked with the Champlain Trail folks and many other basin-wide efforts for several years. I'm appreciative of the truly outstanding progress you have all made in recent weeks. On behalf of a grateful community, thank you. Please extend, in lieu of my own remarks, these words to this assembly. The Battle of Valcour and the Battle of Plattsburgh made important contributions to our nation's history, and the nation deserves to know and appreciate their significance. That goal will only be achieved by all of us living here in this time, stewards of these elements of our history, working together to present their interpretation and significance to the rest of the nation and to the world. The steps you have all taken, marked by today's kickoff, are moving us in the right direction. Thank you. And I say we are all thankful to Chris once again for the work that he's done on our behalf in the past and the work that he's going to do with us in the future.
Thanks, Rich. Senator Betty Lou probably represents the single most historic Senate district in the entire state of New York. I mean, I gave that some serious thought, and I think I'm on pretty solid ground saying that. And the people of that Senate district are fortunate to have such an able and dedicated representative. And without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce Senator Betty Lou.
Thank you very much. I'm concluding 8 years as a legislator representing this area, and indeed I feel very fortunate to be the representative for here. And I've often thought that if and when or should I ever need another job, it was going to be as a tour director, tour guide, because I certainly do represent one of the most beautiful and historic regions in the entire state, perhaps the entire country. But I appreciate the invitation today, and as a tour guide, I would like to suggest that if you have some time, I think the best place to be today has to be the Adirondack Northway. The color coming up here was absolutely incredible and outstanding. So thank you for the invitation. It was a wonderful ride up, and I would encourage you to go ride the Northway. I mean, I do it all the time. But today was particularly nice, and I appreciated being able to do it. Two things I would like to do today is, number one, congratulate you for being regional in your thoughts and being coordinating the efforts. There are, as we look around the room, so many groups who are so important to the cultural, historical, tourism, all of the natural areas that we represent here. And putting all of your efforts together are really, really important. As a legislator, we hear when we meet with one group after the other, and we see that so many times their goals are the same, and yet in some ways they don't always work together. And this is really significant that you have formed this organization to coordinate your efforts. And secondly, I would congratulate you on your timing. We're only 5 years away from the great celebration of the founding of Lake Champlain in the Hudson River. And the quadricentennial celebration commission of the discovery of Lake Champlain and the Hudson River. And I'm fortunate to be a member of that commission. Many people have said, well, why does it even include the Hudson? Why are we doing this together? And the reason is that in the Assembly, every year we were faced with a bill that formed a commission for the 400th anniversary of the celebration of the Hudson River being discovered. And as a member of the Tourism Committee, the ranking Republican in the Assembly, I would get up and argue, why are you just doing the Hudson River? We need to include Lake Champlain. And so we did get to and the governor would veto that bill every year. We got to him and said, why can't we do both together? And he got to the assemblyman who, was from that very interested area of New York City, and said, I passed the bill, but it's got to include both. And so that's why we have a commission that includes both. And the commission is scheduled to have the first meeting in, I think it's 2 weeks. And I'm sure that, it's none too soon because 5 years is going to pass very quickly. And we need to really work together to make this year, 2009, a year that is going to have the highest amount and the most visitors and the greatest tourism events in the history of New York State. So there's a lot to do. There will be a lot coming out of that commission. And I'm very hopeful that there will be 2 subcommissions or subcommittees so that we, on the Lake Champlain side, can work and coordinate our efforts with Vermont as well, as the Hudson Valley may have some other interests, although the Hudson begins in Essex County, so we're involved in both celebrations, and it's important that we're involved in it. In looking at all of our history, and John mentioned it's probably the most historic area, it really has to be. We're talking about the French and Indian War, we talk about the Revolutionary War, we talk about the War of 1812. We have so many historical events. We have a fellow in Glens Falls who took it upon himself to begin this Independence Trail, and many of you have seen those brochures. He just enumerates historic places that were involved, especially with the French and Indian War, but that were the real basis of our freedom from Quebec to New York City. And they sent out like 700,000 brochures on this whole thing. And that, too, is being coordinated with this wonderful Lakes to Locks committee and the passage that we have there. We're so used to people touring by land and visiting, the forts and the historic sites and the monuments and all. But how important our waterways are. And Lake Champlain, as we go down the canal and Hudson River and all. So Lakes to Locks does that. It takes the water routes and the land routes and combines them and makes it very historical. And I really commend Janet and everyone who worked hard on that. There was opposition, there were a lot of questions. I think it's constantly trying to be clarified. We're working together, we're not trying to do anything bad, we're trying to really help our area and do some good things for the area. So they did a great job as well as getting this all-American highway. And, we don't think of it, how important can it be? But if you're a traveler, particularly if you're in a motorhome or you're someone who travels around the country, these designations are very important because they mean that others have worked on it and certified that this is a great place to visit, a great road to travel, lots of things to see, very historical. And so for that reason, I think that the work of the Lakes to Locks and this chart committee, including Lakes to Locks, and really kind of being catalysted by Lakes to Locks, I think, has really gotten us all going, and certainly the events for 2009. We also need to remember our partners in Vermont, and we will be working very closely with them because we hope to see just a huge influx of visitors going both ways with these significant historical events. And I think it's also a nice opportunity for our theatrical groups to get involved. I know if any of you have ever visited Newport, Rhode Island, I'm sure you have, the mansion that is the most fun to go see is the Astor Mansion because they have people, dressed up in costume who really take you back to the days there's lots of opportunities throughout our area for reincarnation or reenactment of all of these things. It's important that we do work together because I think the one thing that we have to keep in mind is that we all have the same common goal. And our goal is to create a point, a destination point for people to come and to visit and to relive our history. In coordinating all of these events, we will attract more people, we will learn from each other and learn from the events as we begin to put them together and coordinate them and calendar them. It's so important to make sure that we're not having conflicting dates. But by having an organization that does this coordination, that's not going to happen. We have a lot of history to showcase. We have events for the naturalists, for the environmentalists, for the tourism businesses, and certainly for all the artists of our region. The most important, too, is the result. And while we have the same goal, we are also all looking for the same result. And that result is going to be that we will attract not just tourists from New York State, but tourists from all over the nation who want to come and see where the birthplace of our freedom actually began and visit all of these sites. And internationally, countries around the world envy us, and they would love to come back here and visit these things. So when we have coordinated tours and everything scheduled appropriately, we will see national and international visitors. And we will, as a result, have an improved economy, helping all of the local businesses as well as the state of New York. So the extra thing that happens as a result of all this is I think that there will be an increase in the local enthusiasm of local residents, excitement in our local area, and appreciation and enjoyment for this wonderful, wonderful place that we all have the privilege of calling home. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On behalf of Janet and David and my chart colleagues, I'd like to thank everyone for being here this afternoon. There is now a brief, I guess, intermission or lull in the program, but I encourage everyone to remain until 1 o'clock when we'll move from here out into even a more beautiful location and be involved in the celebration of the 227th anniversary of the Battle of Valcour. To give you strength for that, there are chocolate cupcakes that I continually smelled while I was standing there, and beverages. And those of you that want a particularly close encounter with history before you step out onto the deck, behind Calvin is a piece of keel of the Royal Savage with the CCHA logo stuck on it. 227 years ago this morning, that was out on the lake in the midst of the battle. Thank you all for being here.
There are very few areas in the United States, maybe an isolated area in Virginia and maybe in Massachusetts. And they're probably the only two that place legitimate...
I do more than that.
Well, I'm no fool.
The weather on this October 11th, 2003 is ideal. There's absolutely nobody complaining about today's weather. Fall colors are starting to come out. It's 65 to 70 degrees with low humidity. It's a little hazy outside of that. It's a picture-perfect day here on the steps of former Hotel Champlain, Clinton Community College. At the podium are Warren Manor and Addie Shields.
Gather here this day to celebrate the 227th anniversary Battle of Plattsburgh, Revolutionary War, when General Benedict Arnold met a far out greater fleet from the British and defeated him here, and which was one of the decisive battles in the battle of our American Revolution. So remarks by Addie Shields.
We do want to welcome you. This is a great location. This is armory of exploration. This was the connector for the British, the French, in their explorations south to the Hudson. We're here today to commemorate the valor of our American forces who lost their lives in this battle, being led here by Benedict Arnold in one of the encounters, the greatest battle of the American Revolution. The British pointed south on October 11th, and today it is just beautiful, and you wonder what it was that day. Benedict Arnold had 15 fishing boats. His men, the wind, and his wits. And in the consummation of this, it became, and we repeat, the greatest battle of the American Revolution. And we can be proud of this. But we come in honor of the men who are buried here, because as you look out in these placid waters, in this beautiful location, truly cemetery, truly 60 men in that 5-hour battle of terror, time of terror. 50 men, I made a mistake, but 60 plus men who lost their lives. And just because of the tragedy of the time and what had to go, they were just slipped overseas. Just dropped overboard as Arnold slipped away, gaining that time for the 13 states, the 13 rebels in the revolution. In 1928, the Saranac chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution placed a marker for this down on Route 9, and in 1929 we do have the photo, and there in the picture spreading out onto the blacktop of Route 9, which had no traffic at that time, there were about 200 people. But in this day and age, we just cannot use that area. The monument remains there, and we are indebted to Glendon College, Champlain College. We're indebted to being out here on this wonderful fort location. We're also indebted to the Clinton County Legislature, who 24 years ago had the vision, the wisdom, to pick up this building and this property and create for all time for our students this avenue of learning. I do want to thank all of you, the veterans, everyone who's here, the auxiliary, Betty Lou, Reverend Sorensen, the auxiliary of the veterans, the VAR, for taking this time for this silence that we, this time of memory, for these people who are buried here. We are especially indebted to the director of the Clinton County Veterans Service Agency, Warren Manor, to know truly that we couldn't live without. We could not put this together without that. Thank you.
We will now have the invocation by the Reverend John Sorensen.
Ask that you keep in your hearts and minds those men and women serving our countries in battles now, as we would pray to God to remember those who've given their lives in times past. O Judge of the nations, we remember before you with grateful hearts the men and women of our country who in the day of decision ventured much for the liberties we now enjoy, particularly those who gave their lives and of themselves in the Battle of Valcour. Grant that we may not rest until all the people of this land share the benefits of true freedom and gladly accept freedom's discipline. This we ask in the name of the God who made us, who sustains us, and who blesses us with the land in which we live. Amen.
Amen. Remain standing and face the great colors of our great nation and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated. We will now call on the wonderful voice of Courtney Wood to sing America the Beautiful.
Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountains' majesties above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea.
Thank you, Courtney. David Glenn is a retired civil engineer who in his retirement has followed a lifelong passion to be an amateur historian. He resides with his wife Lynn and stepson Ryan in the Gilliland homestead on Route 4 at 4091 Route 9 in the south end of the town of Plattsburgh. In the course of attempting to ascertain the age of their home, David has done an extensive search on the Gilliland family. Their descendants now recognize him as an expert on the Gilliland genealogy and history. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor to introduce to you Mr. David Glenn.
Good afternoon. What a beautiful, beautiful, incredible day. I'd like to thank Addie Shields for asking me to speak today. She's our national treasure. She really is an incredible person. Warren Manor, who's the master of ceremonies, thank you. Senator Betty Little is here with us. Jackie Walker, our county legislator. Honored guests and fellow historians and friends, I'd like to tell you today about those who fought and lived in the Battle of Valcour. It's the Battle of Valcour, Warren, not Valcour, right? And those who fought and also died. My object is to give those gathered here a sense of the battle and its place in history. And one of the incredible things that's happening is that the Valcour Bay Research Project at Scotland has been excavating and bringing up and finding a lot of artifacts down here off the south end of Valcour Island, and there's some posters in there that describe that incredible work. The battle is being preserved today, and the artifacts are being brought forward and recognized. So it's something that's ongoing currently. I want to give you a sense of the place of the battle in history. This was fought on October 11, 1776. But the year before, in May or in April of 75, that's when the shot heard around the world had happened, only a year before, at Lexington, Concord. And then in May of that year, Ticonderoga, the fort at the south end of the lake, was taken. In the fall of 75, we'd attempted to take Quebec. We thought the Canadian province of Quebec would want to join the other New York province and Connecticut and Massachusetts and so on in this rebellion. It ended up they did not, but we made an attempt to take Quebec. That happened, the fight to take Quebec happened December 25th, 1775. But we had troops and we took Montreal and we spent the winter there. It wasn't until the spring and early summer of 76 that we withdrew from Canada. The last Americans left Canada in June of 76, the summer that we're talking about now. History's description of the battle. It's interesting what happens is the winners get to tell the story. The British won the battle of Valcour, and their history books got to tell the story. They're historians. What has happened, unfortunately, is all the American histories tend to mimic what was said in the British histories. The number of ships were relatively the same, the numbers of cannon were relatively the same, and the numbers of men taking part in the battle were relatively the same. But all I can liken it to is it would be similar to the New York Giants football team playing Plattsburgh High School football team. We have the same number of men. Each has a football at different times. Each quarterback can pass the ball, different distances perhaps. And they're relatively, size-wise, there might be some slight differences, a couple hundred pounds perhaps, person to person, but they're relatively the same, so the history would say. The American fleet consisted, as Addie said, 15 fishing boats. There were actually a couple of schooners, the Royal Savage and the Revenge, the sloop Enterprise, the Cutter Lee. There were 3 galleys, the Congress, Washington, and Trumbull, and these were some of their bigger ships. They were 73 feet long. And there were 8 gondolas. I won't name them, but the Philadelphia is now displayed quite beautifully down in the Smithsonian Institute. And the Spitfire has been found out here on the bottom of the lake and is could be brought up. It's apparently in absolutely wonderful condition. They were all painted barn red, and the reason for that will become available or be apparent in a minute. And they had cedars along the sides to actually protect them from firing of muskets at them. So there's 15 American ships were opposed by a British fleet under Captain Thomas Pringle, and on board was Governor General of Canada, Province of Quebec, Sir Guy Carleton. They had the ship Inflexible. That ship alone was 100 feet. Our biggest one was 73. The difference in the size of ships is about twice the size in reality. They had the schooners Lady Maria and Carleton, and they had the Radeau Thunderer. That ship alone was 92 feet long by 34 feet wide, a huge craft. The gondola Loyal Convert. They had 24 gunboats and 4 longboats, all with cannon on board. They also had, which is never mentioned, as many as 200 Indian war canoes that came down with them. Manpower. The Americans had 700. Our 700 were largely the dregs of the American Army at the time. Benedict Arnold was asking for anybody to come and help him fight. Send me some troops. So the generals and colonels elsewhere were sending him people that they didn't want, that they were troublemakers or hard to handle or whatever, and they sent them up to Benedict Arnold, get them out of their way. So he ended up having to train all these people with limited experience. The British, on the other hand, had 800. These were some of the best sailors and shipmen of the British fleet that was anchored up in Quebec and had come down the St. Lawrence River. And these people were familiar with how to fire cannons and how to rig a ship and all of that sort of thing. Armaments, the cannon, well, they were relatively the same too, weren't they? Americans had 86 cannon. The British had 89, only a few more. The difference was that in those days you didn't measure cannon by the numbers, you measured them by the amount of weight of ball that they could throw. The British cannons could throw over twice the weight of the American cannons. But we had a secret weapon, and that secret weapon was Benedict Arnold. He recommended to General Washington in that early summer of 76 that we build a fleet to fight the British, to hold them back. We had run out of Canada in that summer. We were down in Crown Point, and the lake was uncontested at that point. There were a couple of little ships on it, but there was no real decisive, no one really controlled it one way or the other. So in building our fleet down in Skenesboro, the American fleet, it forced the British to do the same thing up at St. John's, to build a fleet, to fight a battle that was going to happen sometime later in that year. A tremendously important thing, because it was just the concept of doing that meant that we were buying time. We didn't have the ability to fight the British well at that point. We needed time. So we forced them to stop and build a fleet in the north, and we built a fleet in the south. There were spies all over at that point. Benedict Arnold knew that anything he did, the word would get back to the British. Anything the British did, the word would get back to him. Some of the people that were in the valley didn't know which side to belong to. In those days, it was a third were for the revolution, a third were for king and country, and a third just didn't give a hoot, just leave us alone. So, and they would all talk. They had relatives up in Canada. They were trading north. So the word of what was happening in these fleets was going back and forth. The other thing that was incredible, not only Benedict Arnold building a fleet on the south and forcing the British to build one also, but how to fight that fleet. And that's tremendously important. He knew that he was outarmed, outmanned, outshipped. He did not have a real chance. So he had to do something very unusual. The other thing that he had to do that was unusual was that when the British had first landed in the spring of 76 in Quebec, the Americans that were there basically saw this army of redcoats coming on shore, and we ran. We headed for the woods. We headed south. We wanted to get out of the way of this army that had fought in Europe and done so well. We wanted away from them. So even the sight of the British would have been a hard thing for our people on board these boats to handle. So Benedict Arnold had to come up with a scheme of what to do. And his scheme was to hide his fleet and allow the British to get beyond him, and then also hide the British fleet from his men so that they wouldn't see the British fleet and roll away, run away, head for shore, get out of town. You can imagine what it was like that October 11th, 1776. It was probably like last night when the temperature was down in the 40s. And these men on board the American fleet were sleeping on the deck with a little blanket thrown over them. It must have been brutally cold to wake up and shivering all night and then have to work all day. Maybe it got as warm as this for a couple hours in the afternoon, and then once the sun set, it was cold again. At 8 a.m. on the 11th, Arnold's picket boats saw the British fleet coming off the point of Cumberland Head. They could see the masts up there, some 6 miles away. The picket boats ran for cover, headed back around Valcour Island and down through here to meet the fleet. The British, coming south, had heard that Benedict Arnold was hiding behind Valcour Island. But they sent some scout boats out that came into Cumberland Bay and looked down the narrow path here that you can see from Crab Island down through to the south. Couldn't see Arnold's fleet. So they signaled to the rest of the British fleet, they aren't there. But Arnold had hidden his fleet in South Bay. Once the British committed to sailing past the island, he brought his fleet out and anchored it in an arc, a crescent, down from the point of South Bay over to the mainland. British continued to sail past, but at 9 a.m., Arnold moved some of his fleet out into the channel as bait. He said, we need to be spotted. He sent the Royal Savage out, the Congress, the Washington, and the Trumbull. They sailed out. He said, basically, here we are, spot our sails and come after us. They were spotted. They turned around and came back in to join the fleet. By noon, the Royal Savage had been fired upon and had run aground on the south end of the island. The British had the Carleton and their gunboats come up in to fight with Arnold. And the Indians, well over 200 Indians, some had been put on the shore of the island, some on the mainland. So his flanks were covered. And that's why Benedict Arnold had these cedar trees on board. He knew that would happen, and that was to protect from the fire of the Indians coming from the island and the mainland on the portions of his fleet. 12:30 to 5 p.m. that day. The fight was intense, just intense. It was a long battle. But the British could only sail their better sailing ships up into the line, to Arnold's line. And so he only had to face the gunboats and the Carleton, who basically carried the fight. the Lady Maria came in and then withdrew. The Lady Maria had on Thomas Pringle, the captain who was in command of the fleet, and also Sir Guy Carleton. Benedict Arnold lined up cannon and fired a shot at the Lady Maria, which went directly between the heads of Pringle and Sir Guy Carleton, and that's why they withdrew. I guess one of them said, "This is too close for me, I want to be a little south of here." Had Benedict Arnold hit one or both of them, you can imagine how that battle would have been changed. A lucky shot could have turned that into a victory for us. The Royal Convert fought until mid-afternoon. The Thunderer, the biggest of the fleet, the Thunderer alone, the British Radeau, had as much firepower on board that one boat as did the rest of the American fleet. It did all of the American fleet. At 4 to 4:30, Carleton withdrew. They didn't have daylight saving time then, so that would be like 5:30, 5 o'clock for us now. It's getting dark. I have to get anchored before dark. I have to withdraw from battle, and these Americans are going to be here in the morning, and we'll continue the battle, and I'll bring all my ships in, and we'll devastate. So at 5 o'clock, the firing basically stops. That's 6 o'clock our time. And the British withdraw to the south and anchor in leeward of just below Garden Island, just to the south of Valcour Island. And they all kind of formed in a group. It was gentlemanly then that you stood and fought. You didn't disappear. So in the way things were done in those days, the Americans should have stayed and been there to continue the battle in the morning. Not the case with Arnold. He had other plans. He said, "I'm going to fight this the way I want to fight it." And so he took his fleet. He knew that he needed to get his fleet out of there if they could. They escaped past the British. The British were all anchored well out in the lake. He just took them down south along the shoreline in the dark, and with a lantern at the stern of each boat, and somebody a lookout following the chalk mark near the lantern, that old story. And they sailed south. They got down to Schuyler Island, where they anchored, and the British woke up the next morning, and there was an empty anchorage here. Well, you can imagine how nervous, excited, mad that the British command was at that point. They started scattering ships all over the lake looking for Arnold's fleet. Where have they gone? They can't find them. There's some stories that they fired on some rocks over in Vermont. There's a gunboat rock over there that's named that because apparently they fired on it thinking it was Arnold's fleet. Might have been a little foggy the next morning. So the hunt was on. At 2 o'clock that second day, the 12th, Arnold's fleet sailed out away from Schuyler Island. The Philadelphia had been sunk here. He scuttled some other ships there. They sailed with what they had remaining of their battered fleet down south. British saw them. The chase was on. The British were after them. Arnold was rowing. The wind was a little bit from the south. The British didn't catch up that day. They anchored for that night. But the next day, the 13th, the British were able to gain on Arnold. It was one of those fluky days. If you've been out on the lake and you know what it's like if you're a sailor. Arnold was fighting a south wind. The wind was coming from the south. He was having to row his craft in it. The British had a north wind at their backs. They were able to sail down and catch up to the Americans. They soon captured the Washington. Arnold scuttled some of the rest of his fleet in Buttonmole Bay in Vermont and burned them. And the troops landed, and they raced down some old Indian trails down to Crown Point to safety. 4 of his craft, Arnold's fleet, did escape to Crown Point, so there were 4 left there. But the losses total in the 3 days of fighting, there were 80 killed or wounded. And in those days, if you were wounded, that was almost a death sentence. There were 11 ships out of his 15 destroyed or captured, and 4, as I said, had escaped to Crown Point. The British had 40 killed or wounded. They had 1 gunboat blown up. They're searching for that down here now. 2 others were sunk. They may have been raised a few days after that. But what were the results of this battle? The results were that although the British won the specific battle and gained control of the lake all the way from St. John's in the north, now down to Crown Point in the south, the Americans had won an important, critical strategic victory. Carleton, the Governor General of Canada, realized that it was too late in the season to attack Crown Point and Ticonderoga. It would have meant that he would have had long supply lines over the winter. He would have been very vulnerable to attack because for a large portion of the year the lake is not navigable either by sail or on the ice, and so he would have been vulnerable at those times. And he decided to retreat back to Canada, regroup, and they would attack next year. We bought that one season which allowed us time to regain our strength, to form as a nation more completely, to develop an army, and to face and defeat Burgoyne in the summer of 1777. So that very briefly is the Battle of Valcour, and I just want to pause and remember those incredibly strong-willed people who fought and died that day, and fought and lived to fight other battles, but fought to create this great nation. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for that wonderful history of the Battle of Valcour. Of course, being just 1 month ago today, when we stood over here to my right at Crab Island for the Battle of Plattsburgh, there are two significant points in the history of this region. I now have the great honor and pleasure of introducing to you a lady who has represented us in Albany for the past 8 years and done an excellent job at it, and I know she will continue to do it in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Betty Lou, Senator of the 45th Senatorial District.
Thank you so much. We are so fortunate to have people like David Glenn who are willing to, the amateur historians, as you might put it, who are willing to do so much research, and it involves more research than just here in this area. I'm sure they have to go far and wide to get the information that he has, as everyone had the pleasure of listening to. It was a great history lesson, and I thank you. And I thank all of our official historians, our veterans, our DAR, and our amateur historians for the wonderful work that they do in trying to preserve our history. They're preserving it for future generations. So as we're here still waiting and looking for some of the discoveries that are being made in Lake Champlain underneath the water, in future generations we will have that all intact for our children and their children, and they'll know what took place here. Today there's such a growing interest in our heritage and our history, and cultural tourism, heritage tourism is really a new term, but a very, very popular term. Just today, at the southern end of my district, there's a reenactment of Carleton's raid, and that took place on October 11th, 1780. It's said to be the last action of the Revolutionary War in this area. It was a raid of supply put on to supply the troops in the Virginia and farther south area that was still fighting. So each and every area around here has so much history, and we're all developing it, reenacting, and putting it out there for the public. A young man came to see me recently, a director from New York City, and he plans a documentary on Benedict Arnold. And this is something that if it goes on public television, is done nationally, certainly is going to bring attention to our area. What he wants to do is to tell the story of Benedict Arnold, the hero, rather than the story that is so widely known of Benedict Arnold, the traitor. But in doing so, certainly the Battle of Valcour and this whole area will be highlighted, Saratoga as well. The little navy of Lake Champlain played a huge role in the Revolutionary War. It was made up of men, mostly men, and maybe women in disguise, but I don't know if anyone knows that. That was about the only way women got to participate in the Revolutionary War. But they were not unlike the men and women throughout history and the veterans that we owe such a great deal of gratitude to as well. They were people who had a commitment, who had courage and dedication, who were willing to put their lives on the line, put themselves in harm's way. They flew the same flag that we have today, the same flag that we are flying in other parts of the world, with young men and women also putting themselves in harm's way. And all that they have done and all that they continue to do today make our country a country that is the envy of the entire world for the freedom that we have, the freedom that we enjoy. And so we give thanks to all of those who have gone before us, who have dedicated and worked and been willing to put their lives on the line for our freedom. And we also keep in our thoughts and prayers the men and women today who are still out there in harm's way, preserving our freedom for us and for our children, for the future of this country. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I truly enjoyed the history lesson and enjoy being able to participate in such a significant event. Thank you.
Thank you, Betty. We will now have Amazing Grace as done by Mr. Keiko and Dr. Walker. While that is being played, we will play the wreath. We will now have a traditional gun salute by Mr. William Rowe and Mr. William Miller.
Fire in a hole! Make ready! Fire! Fire in a hole! Make ready! Fire!
Third.
Here's Angela Fonts.
The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long. This is the word of God.
John. Fire in the hole! Make ready! Fire! John.
You just had the playing of taps.
We will now have the Lord's Prayer as recited by Stan Ransom, followed by a moment of silence. I am pleased to be here representing the sons of the American Revolution. Let us pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Lord of hosts, be with us yet, so that we do not forget the noble efforts of the past in war and peace to preserve democracy and maintain order and sustain humanity in ways of peace and social justice. We honor the men and women who have with courage sacrificed themselves on all the battlefields of life with compassion and concern for all men and women. May our memorial to our fallen comrades be a living memorial of continuing effort in the causes for which they died. Go with us as we part, and enable us by your gracious help to maintain in word and deed the principles to which we have pledged ourselves. May yours be the glory, and your children around the world be the grateful beneficiaries. Amen. Amen. But ask you all please remain standing, join hands, and I will ask Mr. Cortland Wood to please lead us in God Bless America.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the ocean, white with foam. God bless America, my home sweet home. God bless America, my home sweet home.
Thank you, Portland. That concludes our program for today, but I would be remiss if I'm not recognize a couple of people in the audience. First of all, Mr. Roger Harwood, the unsung caretaker of Crab Island. Roger. Back a minute ago, and I think he just appeared on Mr. Kit Booth, who is the chairman of the Battle of Plattsburgh Interpretive Commission, who does a wonderful job with the Battle of Plattsburgh every year. A real hearty round warm of applause for Miss Addie Shields, who put this together.
And thank the good Lord for providing such a beautiful, beautiful day on this 227th anniversary of the Battle of Valcour, October 11th, 2003.
Really, I thought I was playing too.